Welcome to History 199 Online. I'm not really planning to teach this course with a glass of wine in my hands, but people always ask me what it's like to teach online. So I thought I'd just send them the link to this video and plant that image in their heads. In actuality, I probably will depend more on coffee. And you may notice that I went to graduate school in New Orleans and spent 10 years living there. So this keeps me going. Now, this video has two purposes. The first of which is to introduce myself. This is not easy, not just because the technology is new to me. This is my very first iMovie, but especially because I'm not used to revealing that much about myself. I've always tried to introduce myself in my classes, but the truth is, every time I've taught this class online, I've posted everything as anonymous. I've never put up a picture, and I'll give an example of what I do say. In every class, I ask my students to send me 3 things about themselves that will help me teach them in a way that works for them. And I promise to reveal 3 things about myself. Now, the 3 things that I say have always been more or less the same. And the first is, I am an addict. I'm addicted to learning. It would be better for you if I was addicted to teaching, but I'm not. So I just want to be honest about our relationship. I like to learn. You're along for the ride. The second one is that the idea for History 199 was originally mine about 30 years ago, and I do think it's important. I think it fills a gap that your education typically has not filled. And that's why we do it. The third one is usually pretty innocuous and has changed from time to time, and it's not really the one that counts. So that's the first purpose. And you'll see as we go through that I'll give you a little background and a little understanding about myself. The reason it's so important is that what we're going to undertake requires a certain amount of trust. And I can't really expect you to trust me if you don't know anything about me, and if I don't trust you enough to tell you these things. So here we go. As you know, the content of this course is the history of the United States and the world since 1945. This content is important, as I've tried to argue elsewhere, but this section has a higher purpose. As with many of my crazy ideas, it began with a discussion of teaching and learning over lunch with my colleague, Paul Vermette. In our conversation, Dr. Vermette introduced me to a couple of books that I immediately downloaded and read over the next couple of days. Both books were by Ken Bain, a historian of American foreign policy who gradually switched his focus to how college students learn and became famous in the process. His first book was entitled What the Best College Teachers Do, in 2004. Through a lengthy process, Bain identified a group of professors from a variety of disciplines and institutions who managed to produce extraordinary changes in their students by focusing on learning that did much more than transfer the instructor's knowledge to the student. Learning that changed the way the students thought. In this process, the students often did exceptionally well on university and professional exams when compared to others, but the real changes were much more fundamental and had a lifelong effect. Bain's second book, What the Best College Students Do, is the one I read first, and the one that had the greater effect on me. The title is a little misleading, but it makes sense in light of the success of the earlier book. For What the Best College Students Do, Bain sought out a number of highly creative and successful college graduates. Some had been students of those extraordinary professors he studied earlier, but others seemed to have developed their creativity and productivity in other settings. Through interviews with these people, Bain identified common threads of what were individual life-altering journeys. As I said, I had a stronger reaction to What the Best College Students Do, but that may have just been because I read it first. My response was a strange combination of inspiration and guilt. The first part is easy to understand. I'm not in the same league with those people, but I know the feeling of discovering your creativity and passion. I know the sensation of having that light bulb turn on for myself, and I've sometimes seen it happen to my students. The guilt is harder to explain. I definitely never had that kind of experience in college or even in graduate school. I did fine and my grades were great, but I just did what I was told to do and I did it well. I was motivated to do that, but I was not motivated to go far beyond it. The kind of self-awareness these people gained in college came to me much, much later. I think the guilt was because it took me so long. I wasted so much time. Bain identifies three types of learning. Three types that I can immediately picture from the students in my own classes here at Niagara. The first type was surface learning, in which the student simply tries to remember everything that he or she has heard or read and hopes to be able to recall it on the test. The surface learner seldom does well and gets the least out of the educational experience. College is really a waste of time as long as the student continues in that mode. The second type of learning is what Bain calls strategic learning. This is the most common type at this or any university. Why? Because we have an educational system designed to create such students, and we seem determined to perfect that system. The educational model dominant in the United States over the last century is based on the idea that education is about transferring the knowledge of the teacher to the students and ensuring that the transfer occurs through a system of testing and grades. We use a system of carrots and sticks to put the focus on learning only what will be on the test, and the test is all that matters. You're advised as a student that the quality of the rest of your life will be determined by your grade point average and your SAT score. I assume you know that the farther down that path we have gone, the lower our ranking of our educational system relative to those of other advanced countries. We have a system that's bad for the students and for the U.S. in an increasingly competitive world. Strategic learners are much better at playing the game of carrots and sticks. They often see themselves as smarter because they've gained insight to how the system works, and now they can make it work for them. They get the most carrots for the amount of effort they put in. Their focus is on satisfying someone else's requirements, not developing their own thinking. There's nothing wrong with being an efficient learner. But strategic learning, as designed by Bain, is about creating obedient employees, not creative, productive individuals. The third type of learning described by Bain is the type that produces those unusually creative and productive individuals. Synonyms: learning for understanding or autonomous learning. Of course, some students manage to combine strategic learning and deep learning. But deep learners keep their focus on their own learning and growth, not on superficial measures and credentials that just allow them to move on to the next level, a level that will not necessarily be any more fulfilling. Just excuse the cat's tail. The good news is that no one was born to be a surface or strategic learner. Everyone can be a deep learner. You were born knowing nothing. Yet in a few years you gain the ability to walk and speak and navigate your world. Your parents tried to help, but they really couldn't transfer those abilities to you. You observed and learned and built a working mental model of the world. And as you grew older, you continued to update and upgrade that mental model. Have you ever watched a toddler learn to do something? That is deep learning in the purest sense. And it is amazing. Almost all children begin school as self-motivated deep learners. They haven't been exposed to the game yet. Teachers in high school and college continuously ask, what happened to that intrinsic motivation to learn? You know the answer. We quashed it. For some, it may persist in hobbies or another interest outside of school. What would happen if you went after U.S. history like you do a new computer game or a smartphone? I encourage you to make yourself a deep learner. Because if you don't, you're dooming yourself to a life of limited creativity and productivity, and consequently a limited enjoyment of life. A life of boredom at work and everywhere else. At best, you will become what is called a routine expert. At worst, artificial intelligence will make you obsolete. It's never too late or too early to make the transition to deep learning. I know this from personal experience. I was a very skilled and successful strategic learner. The same could probably be said for all your teachers in high school or even in college. Our success at strategic learning is often what drew us to this career. I went through the same system you did, with the added effect of a father, superintendent of schools in our town, who responded to a 99 on a test with, what happened to the other one? When I started college, my first semester was the best learning experience of my life up to that point. I did what I was asked to do, but I completely lost sight of grades. At the end of the semester, I went around with my roommate to check on his grades because he wanted to make the dean's list. I'm sure I had heard the term, but I had no idea what was required to make the dean's list. I had not thought of grades since the previous spring. Of course, my roommate did not make the dean's list, but I did. And when my grades came, my father promised to give me his car if I managed to make the dean's list for 5 more semesters. Talk about a bargain with the devil. From that moment on, I could never really forget about grades. I didn't struggle to make the mark, but I did feel the burden of that awareness. I don't know when it happened, but I did ultimately make the transition to deep learning. But only after I finished graduate school and got tenure was I really able and free to learn for myself. I can't put a date on that change, but I was probably about 40 before I really set in. You do not want to wait 20 years to do that for yourself. The natural question is, how can I do this in a school setting? Good question. It will probably require a mixture of strategic and deep learning, but the balance should be tilted toward your own learning. You have to make a conscious decision to change, but you can do it. What follow are some of the essential ideas about learning that have influenced the way I approach this course. Number 1, learning is both social and individual. We need both to make the most of the experience. You can only learn from yourself. I can teach all day, but whether you learn and how deeply you learn depends on what you learn from yourself. 2, think about your thinking. Philosopher and educational pioneer John Dewey noted that experience is not the best teacher. Thinking about experience is. That includes thinking about the experience of thinking. It sounds impossible, or at least painful, but it's not, and it gets easier. Number 3, engage. Ask questions. Ask yourself questions. This is probably the most important difference in deep thinking. Asking and answering your own questions is totally different from answering your teacher's questions. You can't totally avoid answering some external questions, but if you really want to learn, you need to recognize the importance of asking and answering your own questions. Answering your own questions is how you learn how to learn, especially if you think about it. In this class, I will encourage you to formulate your own questions, and I will support your efforts to answer them. I've tried to provide a number of different ways for you to express your answers so that you can have some autonomy. Number 4, connect to each other in order to maximize your learning. Recognize that everyone is different. Everyone has something unique to bring to the conversation. Creative, productive people recognize a good idea when they see one, and they connect it to their own unique perspective. They apply it to a different context in a different way. It still depends on what you do with what others bring to the conversation. But they do bring perspectives and insights that you could never produce on your own. To be able to do that, you have to recognize your own unique perspective. And to do that, you have to observe and think about your own thinking. You have to reflect on the experience. This course is an experiment. We're all the lab monkeys. You will succeed by demonstrating that you are thinking in a new way. I will assume that you want to learn unless you prove otherwise. I will try to support your deep learning any way I can, and I encourage you to let me know how I can help. Because it's an experiment, I will try to de-emphasize grades as much as possible, and I will not flunk anyone for failing to become a deep learner. There are topics we need to address, but you will have more freedom than you are used to when it comes to demonstrating your learning. Welcome aboard. This should be fun, or at least interesting.